Welcome to the ODDSBREAKER'S #1 place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to podcast 3 of 2021. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. You can follow me on Twitter at OBKiev. Follow us at The ODDSBREAKERS and follow us on social media / The ODDSBREAKERS. This episode is being brought to you by jazzsports.ag. For a 100% sign-up bonus, please visit Jazz Sports and use the promo code ODDSBREAKERS. Terms and conditions apply. If you'd like to help us out with our costs, sponsor the website and the podcast, we would love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com, click shop, and become a member. For $24.99 a month, you can get my premium plays before the line moves. If nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com and become a free picks newsletter subscriber. Well, my friends, last night's game, college football national championship, was not exactly a good game. Not at all. It wasn't close, and Alabama kind of pulled away towards the very end of the second quarter. Now, lots of craziness happened. Trey Sermon went out the first play of the game. I'm not giving Ohio State excuses, but I'm sure that threw them off somewhat on offense. I'm sure they had some creative stuff planned for him. And then their backups had to come in. I mean, Master Teague did fine. 15 rushes for 65 yards, a couple touchdowns, but it wasn't like what they were expecting. Trey Sermon probably could have did some more pass catching over there. I mean, Master Teague didn't even catch a pass. I know he was targeted a couple times, dropped a few of them. A couple throws were bad. Fields was a little bit off this last night as well. But the biggest issue was they just could not stop Alabama. And I just was shocked how poorly their defense was coached in this game. You know, if I was Coombs, the defensive coordinator, I would have someone assigned to Devontae Smith the whole game. I mean, he's the Heisman Trophy winner. Okay? He won the Heisman over Mac Jones, over Trevor Lawrence, you know? And they pretty much ignored him and played zone around him. That's why you saw him line up in different areas like the slot and have linebackers assigned to him when he's just blowing them away in speed. I mean, Wade, when he was lined up on the outside, Wade was trying to stop him. And Wade didn't do that good of a job. But at the same time, why didn't you look for him number one? After all the yards this guy has put up, double anyone else's yards the whole year, Mechie and everybody, you sat there and just were cocky and just thought your defense can play normal like they do it against these crappy Big Ten offenses, and you were going to win. That was an absolute failure on Ohio State. And the way I would have played it, you have the safety over the top, put Wade on him, foul him around. It's kind of like a partial type zone type defense, you know, where you have a safety over the top of one player kind of in the area. And yes, the safety can move off after a few seconds if he sees someone else coming into the zone. You have a man on him, and then the rest of the team can try to play zone. Now, there will be other holes created because of that. There always is. But if that's the case and you let Mechie and a banged-up Jalen Waddle beat you, then you tip your cap. But just letting Devontae Smith beat you the whole game in the first half was absolutely despicable.
Unreal.
Bama, though, I got to give them a ton of credit. They did play some really good defense there. The score should have been a little bit closer at the end. I thought that touchdown was obvious to Olave. I don't know how you can watch that replay and say it wasn't. I still think officials kind of do what they want, even though there's evidence proving them against. Hopefully someday football will fix that, but at the same time, Bama was going to beat them either way. you know. The biggest thing that pissed me off was the Mac Jones plus 350 prop for MVP in that game. In one half, he earned that because Smith was injured the whole second half of that game, and they still gave him the MVP while Mac Jones had 36 completions for 45 attempts, 464 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, a quarterback rating of 203.3. And they didn't give him the MVP.
That's terrible.
I mean, what does the guy have to do? He got snubbed for Heisman. And sure, okay. Devontae Smith, amazing year. When Waddle went out, the man stepped up and was a huge part of Alabama's offense. But if you're going to snub the quarterback for Heisman with one of the best quarterback years I've ever seen in my life, you know, Joe Burrow was first last year, but Jesus, if this is not a close second. I mean, Burrow played more games last year, but Mac Jones was 77.4% completion. Amazing. 41 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Okay? 4,500 yards. And they didn't even play a full schedule. I mean, let's look at what Joe Burrow did last year. See how different it is. Joe Burrow played a few extra games, 76.3 completion percentage, a little bit less, 5,671 yards, which was amazing, 60 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Not that far off, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Joe Burrow probably still had Mac Jones if you give Mac Jones 2 extra games for total yards, 4,500 compared to 6,000. But Mac Jones had the better completion percentage, and the touchdown to interception ratio is pretty much dead even. Right? So it just blows my mind. Devontae Smith, fantastic year. I mean, after this game, 1,856 yards, 23 TDs. But someone certainly had to throw him the ball to do that. And not giving Mac Jones the MVP when he threw for 464 yards, over double of what he gave to Smith, and 5 touchdowns kind of blew my mind. And I'm chalking that up as a bad beat. And I don't know what Mac Jones did to not get these acclamations, because he deserved one of them in college football.
You made us believe, put clothes on our backs, you sacrificed for us. You the real MVP.
Well, after last night, we only won a couple prop bets. The way we finished the football season in college last year, we were, and this is sides and totals, 110 and 98 in 11 pushes, about 52.88%, up 5.6 units. It was better until last night, right? But our money line sprinkles, we were 21 and 53 in 1, and we are up 12.7 units. That's how important these money line sprinkles are. Anything over 3.5 is what I usually use. 3.5 or above, you sprinkle the money line. And that made a big dent in the profit. Now we are up 18.3 units in college football for the year. Certainly not a great year. Definitely not our best year, not our second best year, not our third best year. But I'll take it in this crazy COVID year. A lot of things went against us when we were hitting the early lines. And when the NFL comes out, we'll go over the final results for that. We're a little bit in the black in the NFL. thanks to the teasers, really. I've been a lot better on the totals in the NFL than I've been on the side so far this year. But we have a good feeling for this weekend coming up. We have a great show for you today, my friends, because Bryan Leonard from Wagertalk is coming on to break down these NFL divisional playoff games. We're going to have some plays for you, and we're going to have some leans for you. So very excited to bring Bryan on and go over that. Before I do that, though, I did have a listener question from Mr. Alan Stoy. He's actually an ODDSBREAKER'S member. Thank you very much, Alan. Alan would like to know about pressing the Ohio State play. He asked me about that. We had it at +8, and it went to +9, +9.5. And I told him that is not the move that we're going to make. Sometimes we do press our bets if it moves away from us and we still like it. But there's kind of two things that you need to look at. In order for a play to be a play, it has to move past 2.38 percentage points past the number that you currently have. And you know the numbers are different in football. If you check out the oddsbreakers.com/introduction to sports betting 101, then you can kind of see the chart. For example, moving from a 3 to a 3.5, it's about a 5 percentage point move. So it is safe to play on both sides of that. You win one of them, you either push or lose the other. Obviously, in a perfect world, you want -2.5 and +3.5. Much bigger difference there, 10 percentage points, because it lands on your 3 about 8 or 9% of the time, right? So when you're only giving up between 2.38 on one side, 2.38 on the other, that's a great middle opportunity. When you go for your middles, it has to be 4.55 percentage points or better, because you're most likely going to lose one side. And if you do win the middle bet, it's like a hedge, obviously. You can't lose when you're playing for a middle. You can only lose the vigorish. If you do win that middle bet, you play 2 vigorishes. -110 on that side, -110 on the other side. So that's why it has to move 4.55% past your number rather than 2.38%. Percentage points, that is. And you can find all that information on our article, Introduction to Sports Betting. In this situation, going from 8 to 9.5 is about 2.03 percentage points. Doesn't make it. And the second thing you have to think about is when a spread is moving away from you, you're getting negative line value, there's a chance you might be wrong. When we hit our early lines, we are usually right about 70% of the time. The line usually moves in our favor 70% of the time, and about 30% the market thinks differently. Now, of course, we still won plenty of those 30% plays, but that's just how the ball rolls. That's just how it is. That's how you have to play the percentages, right? Now, if this line went to 10 or 10.5 especially, then I probably would have played it again and lost both bets. But in the long run, I wouldn't have. This is just one game in a huge ocean of plays. That's the way you have to look at sports betting. So, Alan, I hope that I answered that well for you, the best I could. If you have any other questions about that, feel free to tweet back at us or send us a message on our website for all you listeners out there. Without further ado, let's get into some football and a few questions about college basketball with Mr. Bryan Leonard. He's one of the best in the business. You know him from his great handicaps on YouTube as well as Wagertalk.com. I'm very excited to welcome back Mr. Bryan Leonard from Wagertalk and Bryan Leonard Sports. You can follow him on Twitter at @BLeonardSports. Bryan, I can't believe it, man. We're in the playoffs. We already have a week behind us. How has your 2021 been treating you so far?
Very up and down. Started really well. had a losing streak. Now I'm starting to get a better feel of everything again. The problem I had last year in 2020 was I couldn't get that big old winning streak going that you get every year and you get a few times a year. But I'm looking forward to 2021. It's really strange with the whole COVID thing, and it's something we could talk about as to how to handicap differently in this situation than you do normally. I'm an older guy, so it used to be for me, when you're handicapping a sport like the NBA, beginning of the day, hey, everybody played. Nobody sat out. There was no situations where a guy was just resting. So that's totally different ways to look at how to handicap now as opposed to the way it was years ago.
It is. I mean, there's surprise resting in the NBA. I gave up on the NBA a long time ago as a fan, and definitely wouldn't want to touch it sports betting. I know there's people that are really good at it, and you guys at Wagertalk are. But for me, myself, you have to just kind of try to predict who's going to be sitting. And it's really hard to figure out who's going to be motivated that night. You got Kyrie Irving having personal problems. What a mess that guy is. I'm in fantasy basketball, of course, because my friend has a league and I almost have to join. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't. But I guess that's the only interest I have. But I just, for me, the NBA has been too much of a challenge. And I love college basketball so much, Brian, that I'd just rather focus all my efforts on that. When college basketball's over, I'll start getting into the NBA playoffs a little bit, and I'll have a few plays for my members. Sometimes when I either come up with them myself, and usually I'll run them by a few sharp guys such as yourself to make sure I'm right. So that's the extent of it. But that's the NBA for you. But I do want to ask you a little bit. Your Cleveland Browns beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think a friend of ours named Marco might have been tweeting a little bit about the Steelers to you before that game. How'd that make you feel?
Yeah, Marco's my friend. He's from Pittsburgh. I'm from Cleveland. Ralph Michaels is from Cleveland. So all we ever hear is about the Steelers. And if you want to see trophies, just come to Pittsburgh. That's the only way you're going to see them. And yeah, he was talking some smack the day of the game, and I kept my mouth shut. The wife and I were sitting here watching the game, and believe me, I wanted to tweet him so bad and text him, about what was going on. But hey, what do I have to say? I have one championship since I've been alive as a Cleveland fan, and I'm 59. So it's a situation where I got no room to talk. But yeah, I bet the Steelers in that game. I gave it to my clients. I thought it was a situation where the Steelers would just come out and play. They wanted Cleveland in the playoffs. In my thought process was, so basically they let them win that game the week before with the backups, and then they played and Pittsburgh just did not play well. Cleveland dominated for most of the game until they went into prevent defense, but they were the better team, and hats off to the Browns. I mean, it's great for the city of Cleveland. It's great for Rolf and I to finally give a little back to Marco in this regard, but yeah, unfortunately, didn't make any money off of it.
That's okay. It's an emotional hedge, man. Yeah. And so you don't have nothing to say. Big deal, man. This is your opportunity to finally give him the worst you got, man. Rub it in his face. It was your opportunity. So, you guys were probably too nice to him. I didn't see a ton of tweets out there, but either way, Marco set you up the plate. He dished it up for you. He served it up cold, and you could have just came back hard. So I guess you took a little bit of the high road, but I'm sure there was some discussions the next day in the office. So pretty fun stuff. When I started watching that game, I was like 7-0, 14-0, 21-0. Okay, 28-0. This is ridiculous. So I had a good time with it.
Here's a quick funny story. As soon as the game's getting ready to kick off, I told the wife, I says, I'm going to run to the restroom right here so I don't miss any of the game. Well, while I'm in the restroom, she starts going nuts. And I'm sitting there. I'm thinking to myself, I'm not falling for this. I said, she's going to expect me to run out. What's going on? What's going on? I says, this is a trick. And I come out, I look at the scoreboard, it's 7-0 already. And I said, you were kidding. I thought she was pranking me.
I thought she was pranking you. Well, it must have got even worse later. So interesting game for sure. And the Cleveland wanted to kind of blow it towards the end, and the coach Tomlin did some strange things with his extra points, and Cleveland just had too big of a lead. But that defense definitely can use some help. But they have their work cut out for them this week. Let's just say, right, Brian?
Right.
Let's talk a little hoops before we get into the NFL, because I love hoops so much. And, I'd like to ask you a question about getting an edge. How do you think people can beat the best modelers out there, which is Ken Pom, Bart Torvik, those type of places? It seems like Vegas really pays attention to it and uses those lines and shades it to the side they think that the public, or just sometimes even sharp bettors, are going to be on. And that's what I've been noticing. But I have my own tricks. I was wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, when everybody is looking at the Ken Pom numbers and assuming that's what the line is going to be, it takes a lot of value out of the Ken Pom numbers. I pay for it. I get it every day. But I also get the Haslametrics.com. I get Bart Torvik. I get EvanMaya.com. So everybody does a little bit of the same. And so that way you can use a little bit from this side, a little bit from another side, and try to figure out what's going on. For example, right now, a lot of the times, now that we're in conference action, a lot of the numbers are based on what happened in non-conference action. And when teams start playing conference games, they know how to play that team. For example, I live out here in Las Vegas, the Mountain West Conference. Air Force is one of those teams. For years, the way they play defense and the way they circle the offense, a lot of teams that have never seen that before, Air Force does very well against them. But once they get into conference play, these teams have seen them twice a year for how many years? They know how to defend them. And you find that in each and every conference. So when you're taking a look at the numbers, they're all going to be based on these websites, all based on what has happened so far. So you're able to make the adjustments. And we're also to a part of the time now where you've got new players coming in. Excuse me, Kentucky brought back a player their last game. He'd only played for a little while, but he made a huge difference. So you've got to be able to stay ahead of that, know who's coming back. You got to know what the drop-offs are on these teams, when teams or certain players are on the court, off the court. It's been done in the NBA the last few years, but you also could do that in college.
Oh, absolutely. And conference play is one of my key things, for sure. What did they do last year? Why do these kids, why are they so good against these teams and not others? Sometimes it's a mystery, but it's just the system, the system that it is. And you see that every day in sports. You see, for some reason, there's a team that has, somebody else's number. Northwestern versus Wisconsin in football. Every year they go to Northwestern. I don't care how good the Badgers are, what they're ranked. Northwestern has their number, and they know how to play them. The coaches just know it. There's no rhyme or reason sometimes, but that's just the way it is. So great example right there. I like to look for spots, of course, and just like anybody in any sport, where a team might have just blew out a big team and shot out of their minds when they only average 42% shooting. That's something to look at when they're looking ahead to somebody. Is very possible. They have to be good enough, first of all, to look ahead, maybe on a nice little winning streak or something. So remember that. Teams coming off a COVID pause has been interesting, but the books have definitely caught up to that. But still, you see what the market does, and then maybe you can get some value back on that because they're just going to go by Ken Pom anyway. So, or take a first half against that team with the COVID pause. That's an interesting one. Definitely the conferences, like you mentioned, and look for some teams that had some bad free throw luck or 3-point luck. I like to look and see if the last 3 games as an outlier. Maybe a team shot 90% free throws, 85% free throws. The last 3 opponents did that to them. That's something to look at. That's not going to happen all the time, but it will affect their number. They lost. It does affect that, and 3-point luck too. So that's kind of the stuff I look at, man. And I think if we're going to beat Ken Pom, we have to do that. And yeah, Haslametrics is one of the places I use. I like to look at teams that score in the perimeter or score, right in the paint. And teams that are tall, usually, not every time, I want to see how the taller teams defend that. If the tall teams defend it, it could be a play, Brian.
Yeah, you talked about spot plays just a few days ago. Iowa, I think it was Sunday, Iowa played Minnesota. And Iowa lost at Minnesota in overtime the previous game. So it was a revenge game for Iowa. And if you take a look at Minnesota, they've been night and day when they played at home and then on the road. So you've got a revenge game, and you've got a team that doesn't play well on the road. And the line came out, and, of course, everybody's betting Iowa in that game, and Iowa was the winner. I handicapped a game, last night, the Connecticut game. And Connecticut was number 2 offensive rebounding. The opponent was number 345th in preventing offensive rebounds. And so that was why I liked Connecticut, and they got the cover. But when I went back and looked in the box score, actually the team they played did better on offensive rebounds than they did. So
DePaul.
It may have been a win, but we got the cover.
Oh, there you go. I mean, sometimes that crazy thing works out for you. But right. Yeah, very true. Yeah, DePaul in the 300s versus for offensive rebound percentage on defense. So they're allowing a ton. And UConn number 5 right now. That's huge. They stick there and they play tough defense, and they get their rebounds. They're cleaning up. UConn surprised me this year a little bit. I'm not sure how much value you're going to have. They're sitting there at a nice 7-1, and they're beating up the Big East a little bit. They took Creighton to overtime, and they're just getting better. So we're going to have a very interesting game versus Villanova this Friday. UConn is hosting Villanova. I can't wait to see where that line goes. So that's going to be
a good game. You'd mentioned free throw shooting, and I was doing a video the other day with Dave Koken, and the team we were talking about was number 1 in the country in free throw shooting. So I said, that's how they shoot from 2s and 3s, and they shoot very well from 2s and 3s, so it's not an anomaly. But when you're shooting 86% from the free throw line on the season, even though you're number 1, you have to assume there's going to be some regression in there. So you have to take every number at its core and decide at that point whether it's sustainable or not. And even though one team is great shooting free throws, I mean, all they got to do is have one bad shooting night, and it changes their numbers.
Yep, absolutely. Look at the offensive side of it. Some teams that sometimes just when it comes to 3 pointers, maybe they're just playing a team that's terrible at guarding the 3-point line. That happens. Mm-hmm. That happens all the time. And maybe they're going to regress back when they play somebody that can cover the 3-point line. I think that's very important to look at. Look at the opponent free throw percentage. Good stuff, man. So let's look at the next question that I have prepared. Which college basketball teams are a bit overrated and which are a bit underrated? Meaning overrated, you might want to fade them, and a bit underrated, maybe you want to be on them their next few games.
A lot of it depends on who's playing now that wasn't playing earlier. I talked about Kentucky a little bit earlier, and you've got a team in Kentucky that since they've come back into conference action, it's a different ball game for Kentucky. A lot of young players on that team, especially if you've got a lot of teams that have young players. As the season goes on, that's a team you want it back. If it's a team that had high expectations coming into the season, maybe an Arizona State who hasn't played well, and you've got some guys on that team that'll probably be going to the next level, I could see Arizona State being a team that you fade down the stretch, at least until you get to the conference tournaments, which is a whole new ball game. It's a fresh new start. So I always take a look at teams that what they were expected to do coming into the season as opposed to what they have done so far. But there's some teams out there that I think are much better than what they showed. Utah lost last night, but this is a team that I think is a little bit better than what was projected, and the way they played, I think they can probably be a moneymaker the rest of the season. I like to play teams that play really good defense. You're always going to get a good effort out of them. So we find teams like that. Like a team like Memphis is a team that I don't think is very well coached. Nebraska, very similar. You got decent offensive number, especially for Memphis, but they just don't seem to give the effort each and every day. So those are teams I look to fade. So, it all depends on what it is. I was very surprised by UNLV when they went to Colorado State to play those two games over last weekend. UNLV live here in Vegas, watch the games. They look terrible. Then they had the COVID. I guess it was a very positive time for them to get the COVID because they had a lot of time to practice. But they look totally different coming out of that when they played Colorado State. And Colorado State, to me, is one of the top 3 teams in the league. So that's something to keep an eye on. We'll see how UNLV does the next game they play. But maybe the Rebels, because they started the year so poorly, and they've got so many new players on that team, second-year coach. So that may be a team we may be able to make some money on going forward.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And, they played Colorado State, lost by 3 points those last 2 games. So maybe some value on them since they kind of came off the pause. They were off for almost, over a month from December 5th to January 7th. So good stuff there. I'm going to start with some overrated that I think. Nevada, 9-3 against the spread, but they're only +1 ATS margin. They're kind of sneaking by teams. And I was on them. For a free play anyway. It wasn't premium that last game against San Diego State. So, it was a 13-point spread, and they almost won the game outright. But I still think they're a little bit overrated now. So I like to look at ATS margin this time of year a little bit. I'm going to say Wisconsin as a favorite is overrated. Wisconsin performs poorly as a favorite. You've seen that against Maryland. You've seen that when they went to Marquette. I like betting on Wisconsin when they're a dog. So just kind of remember that. The reason that is because you've got these seniors that are pretty good athletes, but none of them are NBA, right? They're 22, 23, 24 years old. They've been around. If they're going to be a dog to anybody in the Big Ten, they're going to know it, and they're going to be pissed off. Now, as far as being a favorite, that's when they lax a little bit and their talent shows, and the other team might have some younger kids that are more talented, just a little bit more haphazard, but will come in there and try to beat them. So I want to tell people about that. Marshall, they had some really great free throw luck with opponents the last 3 games. Opponents averaged 57% from the free throw line the last 3 games. So you might find some value fading Marshall, a little bit later in the day on their next game. So think about that. I'm going to go underrated now. Lafayette, 4-0 ATS, which you'd think that, maybe they're not underrated no more, but their ATS margin is still plus 9.6. That's high. 9.6 ATS margin just means everybody's going by KenPom, and KenPom was wrong. KenPom started too low, kind of like with Duke and a couple other teams, right? So that's going to happen. KenPom hasn't adjusted. You look at Drake. Drake's 11-0 against the spread, right? Now, I'm not going to say that they're underrated, but it's just what happens. They're just way better, and it took KenPom a time to pick up. Everyone's going by KenPom lines and things like that when they actually should have been much bigger of a favorite. They're 11-0 against the spread. They have a decent ATS margin too. The books still haven't caught up on them, and they're blowing these teams out. You can say their schedule has been bad, but they're blowing them out. Minnesota is at home is going to have some value. Okay, they just got their butts kicked against Iowa. We gave out Iowa as a free play, and Minnesota 16-8-2 since 2019 as a home team. They're just one of those home road splits that are just crazy. So I like Minnesota probably on their next matchup, which I believe is Michigan. We're going to see what Michigan does against Wisconsin tonight. So those are mine, and hopefully, some of these give you a little bit of value, and you guys learn what to look for. Let's get into some NFL, Brian. Let's quickly, before we get into these games, who is your Super Bowl matchup this year and why?
I'm not one of the guys that does a lot of futures on something like this. I think if you're going to play a Super Bowl future, instead of betting the future, just let it roll over. You're getting better value. Looking in the NFC, I do have some concerns about some of these teams. The Packers should be the team to come out of it because you've got a Rams team that is coming from the warm weather city going up there to play the Packers this week, and they've got, it's going to be cold weather, and you got a quarterback that obviously had a broken thumb. The Tampa Bay and the Saints, we've got two teams here that are very popular, but the Saints are a dumb team, and they've got to go to play in the Packers, chances are, with the Packers being a 6.5-point favorite. So the Packers probably got the best value to get there, but they've got to get through the Rams this week, which isn't going to be as easy as what most people think. So I'm torn in the NFC. I think any of them could come out of it. I wouldn't even count out the Rams if they can get the running game going and play some defense this week. In the AFC, there's still, we talked about Cleveland earlier, but there's something where I could see that Cleveland could come out of this game and get the victory against Kansas City. Cleveland likes to run the ball. Kansas City doesn't stop the run. It'll be a high-scoring game, but you've got a team in Kansas City that just has not covered the spread lately, but that's not their job. Their job is not to cover the spread. Their job is to win the game, and you've got a coach that had an extra week to prepare, so that won't be easy on the Browns. But it wouldn't surprise me if we get the Buffalo Bills to come out of it. I think it has a little bit of value. But then again, all these teams, at least Kansas City, Baltimore, and Buffalo, are all pretty close right now. Obviously, Cleveland's the dog, but even the dog, I think, is live in this one. So anything could happen out of here. If I was to make a guess, I would probably go with the Packers and in the Chiefs, but that's only because they've got the easier game to be played this week.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't mean from a future perspective, but of course that's probably a better question for this type of podcast. But I didn't play any futures because I think it's the Packers versus the Chiefs. I really believe that. And the reason it's just never been an easier route. The only two teams get the bye, one in the AFC, one in the NFC. They get their home field. Who's the two best home fields in football right now, man? I know it's COVID and all, but there's still going to be some fans at both of these games. And you know how Arrowhead is, you know how Green Bay is. Holy cow. That's just really, really good, great luck for them. If the Bears would have beat the Saints, they would have got the Bears. It was kind of like they got their pick of the litter this year. So that's really interesting. But the odds are one of them might get knocked out. And if I was going to pick one of them getting knocked out, it would probably be Buffalo knocking them out, because they're just on such a great scoring streak. And they almost did blow it last week, and I'll get into that. But that's the only one I can see. But I wouldn't bet it on a future because still the money line rollover is going to be better. And you're going to have a lot of more options that way. You can just go half on the Super Bowl. You can just keep your profit, whatever you decide to do. So that's not a bad idea if you think they're at least going to get there. Let's get into some games then, shall we?
Sure.
Starting out with Saturday, the Rams, just like we talked, are playing Green Bay. Green Bay is -7. The total on this baby is 46. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one. I just did a video with Wagertalk on this one, so this is fresh in my mind. I talked about the Rams in this game, I think, being a live dog. The thing, there's three or four reasons why I think the Packers will win this game. Number one, the quarterback. You got a Hall of Fame quarterback against Jared Goff, who's had his ups and downs, but he's not one of the guys you would pick to run your team. And he's got the injured thumb, and he'll be playing in cold, probably snowy weather. That is a concern. But the other thing is the Green Bay had the extra week off. The Rams had to play Seattle, a physical team, for the third time this season. That is a concern. And, obviously the home field for the Packers is very strong, as you mentioned. But one of the things I looked at, Phil Steele, who's a buddy of mine from high school, he puts out information on his website, and one of the things he uses is how teams did against that opponent for total yards gained compared to the rest of the league. And what I'm saying is, basically, on the season, Green Bay has been a number 1, 2, or 3 against every team on the schedule only 3 times. For example, the opposition has had Green Bay only 3 times being their top 3 offensive outputs of the season. So basically the other team's defense. So when you take a look at that, the Packers have only had 3 teams that they really played very well against offensively. Defensively, Green Bay's only held 3 teams to first, second, or third. Every other team has done very well against Green Bay's defense. But when you took a look at the Rams, this one really surprised me. The Rams have had 5 times this year. They've been number 1, number 2, number 3 in yardage against the opposition 5 times this year. And we think of the Rams being one of those teams that do it defensively, but they've been able to do enough offensively to really, that one really surprised me. The defensively for LA, 8 times this year, they finished number 1, 2, or 3 in holding opposing offenses down this year. And 4 of the last 5 have been the last 4 or 5 weeks. 4 of the last 5 weeks. Excuse me. In fact, the only time they didn't during this span was when they played the Jets. They held the Jets to their 10th lowest on the season, and that was a game the Jets won. And if you remember that game, they were a 17-point favorite in that contest. They had just played New England, and they had a rematch with Seattle coming up. It would not surprise me at all if they did not game plan thoroughly for the Jets that game. So I really like the Rams here. The only concern I have is the passing attack with a quarterback that's had an injured thumb playing in cold weather. So the way I'll probably approach this is maybe I'll play the the Packers team total under. Sounds really good to me. Or, the Packers can run, the Rams can run all day against this Packers run defense. So we could see them take a lot of time off the clock. As long as the Rams' best players are healthy, you got to make sure of that. The defense, obviously Donald getting hurt last week, and they've already said that Walford will not be playing this week. So Golf will be getting the start. But the only thing that bothers me, it would be a perfect scenario for me if it wasn't going to be cold weather up there, and that's a concern. So that may be something we have to take a look at once the game starts, and some in-play could be in order for us in that contest.
Yeah, it's funny. We did do a prop last week. Our largest play was a prop. It was Alvin Kamara over 67 rushing yards. Well, he got into 100 yards. So against the Bears, it was our largest play last week, and it actually did take a little bit longer than I thought to hit. But without Roquan Smith being there, I thought it made sense. The Cam Akers prop's going to be interesting, and because Henderson's probably still banged up, and they got Brown there, right? I'll have to relook at the injury report or try to look at it every few days and make sure everyone's available. I mean, Donald's a little bit banged up, but they say he's going to play, which is important. I guess Cooper Kupp is supposed to play. So everyone check the injury report, very important. This game is so interesting to me, though. And it's got the lowest total, but you have teacher versus student here. Sean McVay had Matt LaFleur under him for a year with the Rams. The year before that, Matt LaFleur was quarterback coach for the Atlanta Falcons under Kyle Shanahan when he was offensive coordinator. I mean, look at LaFleur. He's got some Kyle Shanahan in him, and he's got some McVay in him. That's pretty good combination right there, man. As a Bear fan, I hate to say it, but the dude is legit. Old teacher versus student story in this one, in my opinion. And, of course, LaFleur did bring the Titans from terrible offense to serviceable offense before the Packers hired him, if you remember that. I think it was Vrabel's first year or second year. But more importantly, let's look at the lines. This totals tells me that the Rams defense is going to show up. Kind of like you said, looking at a team total. When this happens, the rule of thumb is to look toward the dog. It's starting to be a little bit lower, right? It's got its exceptions, but not as much during playoff time. And you're right, the Rams did put up a ton of yards. I mean, Golf, I don't know what the heck happened that Seattle game when he just looked terrible. I was on Seattle a couple weeks back at Seattle. Of course, then they go up there and win. But Golf came in and actually played really well. I mean, that's what shocked me. Walford started the game, got hit a little bit hard in the head, had to come out, and Goff came in and finished pretty solidly. Scored some points there. There's two weaknesses in this game. Green Bay can't stop the run that well, allowing 4.5 rushing yards per attempt. And obviously that they haven't had to deal with that as much because LaFleur is so good. They always jump the teams. They make the teams play, having to throw the ball, from their heels, right? The teams have to be more one-dimensional. They're not allowed to. They're not able to take advantage against that. If you remember last year, the Packers versus the Niners went up like 28-31 to zip the first half. And then the Packers somewhat caught up, but it wasn't enough in the second half because they ran the ball and they jumped them. I think it's important that the Rams do that, control the clock, try to keep it out of Rodgers' hands. But Sean McVay and LaFleur, they know each other really well. And the weakness of the Rams is definitely if Sean McVay's stuff falters because it gets called out. He's the king of misdirection. A lot of his yards are based upon misdirection, play action, doing stuff that teams are just not expecting. And, of course, Aaron Donald and that amazing defense that he has. Well, I don't think that the Packers are going to win by 7. I don't think Sean McVay's going to allow it. I mean, he's the teacher here. It's just kind of like when those Belichick ex-coach things pop up. You know what happens there. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be good enough to win the game because the Packers are stacked. They're playing at home. They're powerful on offense. They're decent on defense and as a whole. And I just think that the Packers should win this. I'm pretty convinced that they're going to win, but I just don't think they're going to cover 7. Both teams are 0.7 yards per play, positive 0.7. The Rams had a harder schedule. If you look at Sagarin, the Rams' schedule ranks 9th, and the Packers ranks 31st. But you know why. The Packers have been beating up teams like the Lions, the Vikings, and the Bears. They got those 3 teams twice, so good for them, But it's something you got to look at, too, My power rings have it 2 points on a neutral field. So, this spread should be 4.5 to me, or 5, right? I ran through my little algorithm. Scott has the Packers winning 26-22. And I had to round up on that. It was more like 25.7, something like that. So I was really close to the total. And for that to happen, it's got to be perfect. But that tells you the spread should be around 4. So I think the spread is too high, and I am going to play the Rams here. And I think they have a shot at keeping it close here. Just remember, Sean McVay is going to be extra motivated because of that story. Any final thoughts?
I think you got a winner.
All right. 2.5 stars on that baby, and that's high for me. So hopefully we get this one. Let's move on to the next game. Baltimore versus Buffalo. Buffalo's minus 2.5. The total on this baby is 50 points. This is an interesting matchup because you have the rushing team versus the passing team. Buffalo playing great down the stretch, but so is Baltimore. The Colts gave them some problems last week. If the Colts had them on their heels a little bit, and if they just kick a field goal instead of going for the touchdown when they're 4th and 2 or whatever it was, 2 or 3 yards to the goal, that could have changed the game. But you could tell Buffalo started out scared a little bit. It's their playoffs. They haven't been there and won a long time. But then all of a sudden, McDermott and Josh Allen figured it out, and they jumped ahead of Indianapolis, right? I want to say Baltimore Colts, right? I don't know why, but they jumped ahead. And then McDermott almost blew the game. He's sitting there throwing the ball when he should be running the ball when they're up. I think it was at least by 7 in the fourth quarter. And then Josh Allen fumbles the ball 30 yards back. It was just a terrible play call. They kept throwing the ball there when they were pretty much running pretty good at that point in the fourth quarter. The Colts were gassed. They wanted to give that game away. Then the officials stepped in and made an awful call. And then they replayed it and saw how awful it was. And they still kept it as they called it. After seeing blatant evidence that they were wrong, they kept it there. And imagine if the Colts would have tied it up and won that game, the backlash that would have happened, if that would have happened. I mean, what the heck are they seeing? They're not seeing anything. They're just literally going against technology because they're stubborn. But that's just a whole different argument. The Ravens, like I said, playing well down the stretch. And if you told me they were only going to score 20 points, I would have probably bet a lot more on the Titans. Thank God I didn't, because I lost that bet last week. And the Titans, their defense is terrible, but that just tells you something too. Maybe the Ravens should have scored more. I expected more of a 31-28, 28-24 worst case scenario type game last week. But the Titans, they let Lamar run up 136 yards. I mean, all the credit I gave Vrabel for how he played Lamar last year and earlier this year by keeping him contained, taking away the middle of the field, and then they just do the complete opposite. You have the defensive ends are either charging inside, letting them run around, or they're going way around on the outside on a normal pass rush on a slow quarterback. Lamar just takes off. What are you doing? I did not understand what Vrabel was doing. Also, terrible play. A couple 3rd and 2s in the fourth quarter, they throw the ball. On a 3rd and 2, when you're losing in the fourth quarter, you run it because you can run it. You're going for it on 4th, right. and then there's just some really bad play calls. But enough of that. I think that the Bills, they can be run on, but I have to look at what these teams did against running quarterbacks, because actually Josh Allen has some wheels and Lamar Jackson has some wheels, as you know. Well, the Bills had some trouble against Kyler Murray. They should have won that game in Arizona, but that Hail Mary pass that we all heard about for a month and started Arizona on a super losing streak, was something that counted against them. And at least they're able to shut Cam Newton down. Now, both teams lost against Patrick Mahomes. I'm not going to hold that too much, but the Ravens did lose against Cam Newton. They did lose that game against Cam Newton. So they both lost up against Mahomes. They lost against Cam Newton. It's going to be important for the Bills to keep the pressure on this game, because the Ravens can suck you dry if they're just getting chunk yards on you, right? Mm-hmm. The Ravens' strength is their defense, rushing the ball. Top team, 194 rushing yards per game, but dead last in passing, 100 passing yards per game. The good news for the Ravens is that the Bills are bad at stopping the run, allowing 4.7 yards per rush. Buffalo's strength is the pass, 3rd best in the league, 290 passing yards per game. The Ravens, pretty good against the pass, but their strength of schedule is so bad. 29th on Sagarin. They're in the AFC North, as you know very well, being a Cleveland fan, right? Their strength of schedule is that easy. I'm going to be honest. I have these two teams equal in my power ratings, but if you're Buffalo, you keep Lamar contained. You just concentrate on the run. Maybe you have to play some man. Maybe the receivers do get open a little bit. Maybe Andrews gets a few catches, but make Lamar beat you passing. And if he does, God bless you. But that's not how they win games. They win games by running the ball with Lamar and running it. So if they all of a sudden just go out of what they've been doing all the last 2 years and beat you, tip your hat to them. But you have to stay strong on offense, cheat up, stack the box. Don't let Lamar run. Don't even go at him from different angles. Just kind of keep him contained and eventually get to him. Get your hands up, block the ball. That's how you're going to beat them. If McDermott does that, they're going to win this game. If you look at the spread, it's been bouncing around. And my algorithm has it 28.5 to 26. So my algorithm has it 2.5 exactly on the dot. And I have them equal. So if you like the 3 points, because it's a key number, you probably take Buffalo. If you think the Ravens are going to win, you probably take them on the money line. I'm going to lean Buffalo, but I think there's going to be some serious points scored in this game, because I think Buffalo will give up some points, and I think there's going to be some desperation points at the end. So I'm taking the over 50, 3 stars. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the line's been bet down to 2 just about everywhere now. Money coming in on the Ravens, and you can understand why if you're a Harbaugh fan. I believe he's won 8 straight games on the road in the playoffs. But you had mentioned the AFC North. Three of those 4 teams made the playoffs, so you have to be something to take a look at. I mean, Cincinnati's got a hell of a future, But once their quarterback went down, they didn't have any chance at all. But, I'm looking at this from the Baltimore standpoint. First off, they're playing their third straight road game here. And if you take a look, you mentioned the way Baltimore ended the season. But going down the stretch, they played Dallas. They did play the Browns in a game that was, to me, the best game of the season. It was that featured game on I don't remember what day of the week it was, but that was the one where he came back out from whatever he was doing in the locker room, and they come back and he brings them right back down. They win that game 47-42, but that could have easily been a loss. Then after playing Dallas and Cleveland, they play Jacksonville, the Giants, and Cincinnati. So yeah, they look great. They look great against bad football teams. Last week against Tennessee, yeah, they get that victory. But as you pointed out, scoring 20 points against that Tennessee defense, that is a concern. They're playing a team that's got the better defense here. In fact, the better team overall in Buffalo. You take a look at one of the things you want to look at when you're comparing these two teams is how are they going to score. You talked about Baltimore. They average 5.6 yards per rush. Most of that, if not all of that, is the quarterback. The rushing game has not been that good this year. It's all been on the quarterback. And you got a Buffalo team who allows 4.7 yards per carry on the season. But when you take a look at first downs, a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to first downs, but I do. On the season, Buffalo has 41 more first downs than their opponents. Baltimore has minus 10. That means the only way Baltimore scores is if they have a breakout play. You've already talked about how Baltimore struggles in the passing game, which means they need the quarterback, Lamar Jackson, to have a big day running the football. That puts a lot of pressure on a guy who until last week had not done well in featured games, and either back in college or in the NFL. That is a concern, major concern for me. I think Buffalo, even though my number had it basically what it is right now, I think Buffalo's the better team here. You go back, the losses they had. Last loss was all the way back when they played Arizona in the Hail Murray game. But that game could have easily gone the other way, which would have been 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 straight games they would have won if not for the Hail Murray. And, Buffalo's gotten a lot of support. Can you imagine how much support they would have going into the playoffs at home, 11-game winning streak against a team that only scored 20 points against Tennessee last week? I think we see this line over 3. Now you're only laying 2. A lot of the guys I respect, we've talked about this, they're on the Buffalo side here. I agree. My number doesn't show it, but I could see more ways for Buffalo to win this game than I could see Baltimore to win this game. To me, to put that much pressure on Jackson and have him have a great game in order you to win, I would rather have Buffalo and they can spread it around a little bit so Allen doesn't have the weight of the world on his shoulders here. So I kind of lean with the Buffalo side here, and under 3 I think is a bargain.
Wow, there you go. Very strong take on that one. You're talking me into the Buffalo play, man. So I'm gonna have to reassess. Great point. Imagine if they didn't lose that Hail Murray game and it would have been an 11-game winning streak here. They're powerful, man. And I'm just a little worried that the coach is not used to the situation. I know Harbaugh is, so, and I know the Ravens kind of feel that they were slated last year and should have been the best team. So you got that too. But under the 3, I can't argue with you. And I'm considering a small play. Maybe I make a 1.5, but you're telling me some bigger players are making larger plays. So that gives me a little bit more confidence. Let's go into a game that you're going to know more than me about. And Cleveland versus Kansas City. Kansas City minus 10. The total on this I wrote down is 56. And I just have a few quick things to say. That high total for a playoff game, but last week the Browns went to 85. So that's almost like watching your old Oregon versus Baylor type games, right? in college football. The Browns' offensive line issues, as we all know, a lot of things went their way last week. 5-0 turnover ratio. I mean, they should have won this game by more than 11 points, right? Brian, do you agree with that? I mean,
Yep.
Over 11. They're outgained by 163 yards, but at the same time, they're playing prevent the whole second half. So if I was doing my misleading final score, I would definitely say, hey, 5-0 turnover ratio. Maybe you give a tick to the Browns, but I would probably just leave it because they were also outgained and the other team came back in. My power ratings has Kansas City winning by 9.75. So I'm so close to the spread anyway. My algorithm has Kansas City winning by 8, 32.5 to 24.5, which is a total of 57. And my potential letdown for the Browns tells me that, I mean, obviously the two lines I gave you is under 10, right? So I would say normally lean to Browns, but I don't know. They just beat Pittsburgh. They're still in a position that they're not used to. I think even if they lose this game, you can look at this as a very successful season. Kansas City is a sleeping giant, and they got bored this year. They've turned it on when they want. Maybe they're a little rusty in the first half. Maybe you look at the Browns in the first half, but I'm going to stay away from this. I even with my numbers, I almost lean Kansas City at 10, but I'm going to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, this is very interesting. As I'm watching the game, Cleveland's up 28-0. Sportsbook starting putting up the line between the Browns and Kansas City. Line opened 7.5. They're up 28-0. Line up is 7.5. From that point on, Cleveland was interested in taking time off the clock. They were giving Pittsburgh anything they wanted underneath. Pittsburgh's offense, which had done nothing before that, all of a sudden starts moving the football. Ben throws the ball, what was it, ridiculous amount of times last week, 68 times?
Yeah, the whole game.
Yeah, so at 1 minute, it's 7.5. I wake up the next morning, and it's at 10, which tells me a lot of people looked at that Cleveland prevent defense, and I've watched every Browns game being a Browns fan. They've done this all season long, which is why when you take a look at the points they've scored, points they've given up, the yardage they have, and the yardage they've given up, it's been the same all year. It's one of those situations that anytime they get the lead, they let the opposition come back by getting little short passes, and they're just trying to kill the clock. So I think there's a little advantage there for Cleveland. It was 7.5. Now it's 10. The reason being 10 is so important is, comes time for the playoffs, the public loves the Chiefs. And if the line is 7.5 to 9, and 9.5 even, people could play a 7-point teaser and get it down below 3. By putting the game at 10, it keeps people from playing the teaser. I think it's an artificial 10. It wouldn't surprise me if later on in the week, when some of these Browns offensive linemen, as you pointed out, are coming back into the fold and they're able to play this week, that this line goes down. So if you like the Browns right now, I think 10 will probably be the peak. I think it goes down a little bit. Cleveland's a team I can see Cleveland playing Kansas City very well because I think they match up decently well against them. They're not going to be able to stop Kelsey. From a tight end standpoint, the Browns don't do well against tight ends. Their defensive backs are not great, but Ward will be back this week. That'll help them a little bit. But you've got a Cleveland team that runs the football, and they run the football better than anybody. They're more explosive running game than anybody in the league. You take a look at first downs. Cleveland's minus 11 on the season, while Kansas City is plus 44. Cleveland a minus 11 doesn't bother me because very similar to Baltimore, they're a big play team. They've got some wide receivers on this team, even without Odell Beckham. They got some guys. Landy's a guy I love. He's just been terrific all season long. He's a leader. They've been able to win against everybody they played, except for the game where everybody had COVID. And a team loses to the Jets 23-16. So it's a team in Cleveland that I think is much better than what we've seen. The offense has been held down by a lot of games in Cleveland where the weather was bad. But then again, that makes the defense look a little bit better than what it was. Cleveland can run the ball as much as they want against this Kansas City defense. They've got a passing attack that I think will have success against Kansas City. But in turn, you've got a Kansas City team that could pass the ball all day against the Browns. You've got the most elite quarterback in the league. You've got a coach in Andy Reid with an extra week to prepare. We all know he's been fantastic when he prepares, has extra time to prepare. Cleveland's done a great job. You mentioned a letdown. Yes, there will be a letdown here of some sort. They're not going to come out and say that. But when you beat a team for the first time in 18 years on their own home field, the hated Steelers. Now, it was more hated when I lived back in Cleveland 20 years ago when Cleveland actually was a contender. But still, there's a lot of people in Cleveland that all they wanted to do was knock the Steelers out of the playoffs. The players want more, but the fans, you mentioned it, they could be very happy with knocking the Steelers out of the playoffs and getting to this point. That would be a good season for the Cleveland Browns. My thoughts are the best way to play this game is to play the over. It's a high total, but if you look at these games, the league never goes too low on an under, and they never go too high on an over, and that's the sports books. We saw it yesterday in the national championship game. There was no way I could see that game not going over. Now, it only went over by a point. And that was because Alabama went into running the clock the second half, very similar to what Cleveland did. And Ohio State was a one-dimensional offense at that point. So it barely went over, but it went over. And I think we're going to see something very similar here to the last team that has the ball can win this game. And when you catch a 10 with Cleveland, I lean that way. But I really think both these offenses are going to have a lot of success this week.
All righty then. Well, I'll tell you this. I can't bet Cleveland, but I'll definitely be rooting for you this week, for sure. And, who cannot root for an underdog like Cleveland, So they're playing the champs, and we'll see if the champs get shocked. See if they get shell-shocked. It's going to be a fun game to watch. Anything with a total of 56 is going to be some thunder and lightning, right? So real excited for this game. Tampa Bay versus New Orleans. New Orleans -3. The total is 52. This is the third meeting this year between these teams. You know the saying, third time is the charm, right? Wrong. Tampa Bay, solid, but I think they're still going in over their heads. And I'm still thinking back to when Vita Vea got injured. I think it hurt this team. They've been hot the last 5 weeks, scoring 25 plus points. And if you look at the last 4 weeks, it was 32 plus points. But those were against the Vikings, the Lions, Washington, and the Atlanta Falcons twice. The Bucs only had one great performance versus a great team, and that's when they beat the Packers. That was way back on October, I think it was 18th, something like that. And that's the only team over 500 that they beat. The only team over 500 that they beat was the Packers. They lost against the Saints twice. They lost against the Rams in a perfect spot for them, and I was on Tampa that game, and I remember it well. They lost against the Bears at the Bears. They lost against Kansas City, of course, and they came back at the very end to backdoor that spread. I'm sure a lot of people remember that. Actually, I pushed that one. Thank God I had the 3 and not the 3.5. But Tampa Bay, all whistles and buzz and flair, but I don't think they have a lot of substance there because I think that their defense isn't that solid. And I think when they go against New Orleans, New Orleans is going to punch them in the mouth. And I think the reason that you're getting such a value on this line is because New Orleans did not look that good against the Bears. You have to remember that New Orleans, the Bears chunked away a lot of that clock in the first half, and they missed a field goal in the first half too. Yeah, the Bears missed a deep pass, but there was not one point in that game that I thought that New Orleans wasn't going to win that game. And then, of course, they let the garbage touchdown from the Bears happen at the end. Tampa Bay has a nice plus 0.9 yards per play. The Saints are plus 0.7 yards per play. But you have to remember, they didn't have Drew Brees for 3 games. They're just kind of pounding the ball. My power rings has the Saints 1.25 points better on a neutral field. But there's going to be some fans in New Orleans here. And I think this line is short by a half point at least. I think the spread should be 3.5. I think it should be 3.5 or 4. My algorithm's got the Saints only winning by a point or two, and that's my algorithm. I go by everything. But you have to remember, Taysom Hill was part of that. And I usually don't run my algorithm if the quarterback was out for multiple weeks, but I just did just to see what the total would come out, and I got 50 on the dot. So the Saints, they beat them both times by double digits, and they're going to do it a third time at home because the Saints are still pissed from last year. Tom Brady is a great quarterback, and he's been great in the playoffs, but there's no Belichick this year. I'm taking the Saints -3 for 2 stars. What is your thoughts?
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of people saying that it's tough to beat somebody the third time. Well, that's a fallacy, as if you run the numbers, I believe it's around 65% of the time the team wins the third game after winning the other two. A lot of the guys I know are on different sides here. I've got guys I respect that like both sides here. But now that the line's gotten down to 3, it's leaking back up a little bit again. I think there's some value here on the Saints. I agree. I've watched the games against Tampa, against New Orleans, against Tampa. And in either game did I think that New Orleans was not going to win that game. And after watching them last time they played, when they played at Tampa Bay, they win that game 38-3. A game in which it's hard to believe that the Saints only ran the Tampa Bay only ran the ball 8 times all game. They fell behind early, and they just completely were a one-dimensional team. It's a situation here where you're looking at, I've not been in this building, of course, I haven't been in it when it has just a few fans, but when I was in it and it was packed, that was pretty impressive. It was a wild atmosphere. Of course, it won't be that way this week, but still, it's a team playing in their home stadium, and they've done very well in this stadium. And I'm not a fan of Taysom Hill. I don't know why they continue to play this guy at the quarterback position. To be totally honest with you, I thought that Winston should have gotten a start. I thought this offense was just perfect for Winston, but he never got really a chance to play. Only 11 snaps all season long. You mentioned Drew Brees not looking good last week. I agree. He doesn't throw the ball. He lofts the ball. But the team knows that he's not going to be throwing the ball deep, so they got to go short. And he is still accurate when it comes to the short passes. I don't trust him throwing the ball deep, but I do trust him hitting his guys on the slants, all the other plays, the screens, all that kind of thing. So you know what you're going to get out of the Saints is you're going to get a team that's going to just move the chains as they go along all season or all game long. And, you look at the Saints, they're up 63 first downs on the season. Tampa's done very well, too, at 48, obviously, a veteran quarterback in Tom Brady. But I prefer the Saints here. I think the line's a little bit short. And I just think Tampa Bay has been a team that I think, because of Tom Brady, has been overrated all season long. And, they finish the season. They play after they lose to Kansas City 27-24, Minnesota, Atlanta, Detroit, Atlanta, before they had to play Washington in the playoffs. And Washington had a quarterback, say what you will, but he hadn't been in the NFL before. In fact, they just signed him a month ago, and he scored 23 points against this Tampa Bay defense. Obviously, they go into the game, didn't know anything about him. You got to always keep that in mind, because if you've got a guy on tape, it's a different thing. But I was impressed by the way Washington played against Tampa, and I'm going to fade Tampa in this game. I like the Saints here. There's plenty of threes out there right now to be able to take advantage of it. I'll lay the points with the Saints at home.
Well, look at that, man. We have a lot of agreement this podcast. Good thing, because I always love agreeing with you, with all the experience that you have. How amazing of a handicapper you are, man. So great stuff here. Great job breaking down these games. Where can our listeners find your amazing content, plays, and information?
They can always follow me on Twitter at @BLeonardSports, and they can follow me over at Wagertalk. And if you want to see some more in-depth plays, we've got videos out there each and every day. I also been putting up a free play each and every day in basketball, in football. So it's been a nice run on the free play. So check those out over there at wagertalk.com.
A huge thanks to Mr. Bryan Leonard for coming on our show today. Make sure you check out his plays at Wagertalk.com, my friends. There is no teaser this week because we only give out teasers when the numbers make sense. They do not make sense at all to me this week, so we are passing on any teaser potential. And now it is time for
The Sharp Side of the Force.
The Sharp Side of the Force is brought to you by uwager.eu. For a 80% sign-up bonus, please visit uwager and use the promo code ODDSBREAKER'S. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Sharp NFL. Looks like the Ravens have a little bit of action, but it's gone. It went from +3 to +2.5. 46% of the tickets on the Ravens and 62% of the money. That thing's going to even out soon. And that's about it. I mean, at these current numbers, there's no sharp money. These Saints is kind of dancing around 3.5. I've seen some action on both sides of that one as well. Chiefs a little bit when it was at 9.5. 47% of the tickets on the Chiefs, 59% of the money, but nothing major. Let's look at the totals. So as far as the NFL, the sharp money on the Packers versus Rams, under 47 down to 45.5. 40% of the tickets on the under, 75% of the money. Sharp money on the under. Browns versus Chiefs, under 57. 23% of the tickets on the under, 56% of the money. So the money outweighs the number of tickets, obviously. And then sharp money on the Buccaneers, under 52. 34% of the tickets on the under, 90% of the money. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review on your podcast platform. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Go enjoy the games and go get some winners.